Welcome to the Create More Intimacy podcast. I'm Alisa Stoddard, and I help men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. You think she's criticizing you. You think she's trying to start a fight. You think she just wants to tear you down. But what if she's just disagreeing with you, and that disagreement feels unbearable? What if your constant need to defend, explain, or even win is actually the thing driving the disconnection you are trying to avoid in the first place? This episode is going to be uncomfortable, but if you listen all the way through, it could change everything. Welcome to episode 15 of Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. Today, we're going to talk about defensiveness, specifically the belief that any disagreement is an attack, is a personal affront to you, and your instinct to shut it down fast. It's a pattern I see all the time. A man is trying really hard to be a good husband. He shows up and he provides and he loves his wife and family. But when she challenges him, when she has a different opinion or sees something differently than he does, he spirals. He might shut down, or maybe he starts to push back hard. And pretty soon, they're not actually having a conversation anymore. They're just managing tension, and then intimacy just disappears. Let's talk about what's actually going on and how to shift it. You might recognize this. Here's what defensiveness sounds like. That's not what I meant. You are twisting my words. Can't I just say something without you jumping all over me? You're always so sensitive. Do these things sound familiar? Well, I want you to understand that that's not clarity, and it's certainly not strength. That's not just standing your ground. That's fear, and it's dressed up as control. Most men don't recognize their defensiveness. They just think they're being logical or reasonable or calm. But logic without emotional awareness isn't maturity. It's a way to stay in control. And the truth is, you cannot build intimacy and defend your ego at the same time. What to you feels like just explaining yourself often lands as rejection or as dismissal or as a shutdown. And that's a huge price to pay. That has a huge cost. When she stops talking, you stop connecting. And now you're not partners, you're adversaries in the same house. I have this client that told me, I feel like I'm always getting in trouble and I can't say anything without her jumping down my throat. As we talked and we slowed it down and started to assess what was really happening, we realized his assessment wasn't what was happening. He'd share an idea about the kids or money or whatever, and his wife would disagree, and not necessarily forcefully or rudely or with anger. She'd just have a different opinion. And before she could even finish, he would cut her off or give some kind of nonverbal reaction, maybe a heavy sigh, or starting to interrupt and saying something like, "You always do this and you don't listen to me." She wasn't attacking. She was participating. But he took this pushback as disrespect and immediately moved to shut it down. Why? Because he didn't have room or the ability for two people to be right at the same time. He told me, if I let her opinion stand, it feels like I'm weak, like I've lost something, I'm out of control, I'm not worthy. And that's what I see in so many men. This belief that disagreement equals disrespect. And the idea that if you're not the one with the final say, that you've failed, Unfortunately, this creates a really awful pattern, one where she cares less and he feels more disconnected. And both of them feel like they're walking on eggshells. That isn't strength. That's fear of doing the talking. So why do we react like this? Let's talk about where this comes from. Many men are raised with this subtle but powerful message that sounds like you're supposed to lead. You're supposed to make the final decision. You protect, you fix, you solve all the problems. And I mean, sure, that sounds fabulous on the surface until you look at what it does to the relationship and then how it doesn't feel like a partnership. If you were taught that you're supposed to always have the final say, then any disagreement is going to feel like a challenge to your authority, right? Every moment of difference feels like an attack on your value. If you think your job is to solve all the problems and she's got good ideas, then what does she need you for? Might be some narrative that you start thinking. But what's worse, if you always insist on having the final word, you sort of create this interesting power dynamic that exists a lot with parent-child settings or like a boss and a worker setting. And that isn't great for a marriage. And I know you don't mean for it to come across that way, but that's what can happen. The downside of this is that no adult actually wants to be in a relationship that feels like they're always the child. Your wife's not going to feel like that's a great plan. When you correct her or override her or explain things every time she disagrees, you're not actually creating clarity at all. You're creating this hierarchical system where you get the last say. And that makes the real connection and intimacy that you want kind of impossible. Men will say to me, "She doesn't tell me anything anymore." And to them I say, and to you I say, well, why should she? If she knows that you're going to interrupt or give nonverbal clues that express how you don't agree, then why would she? If she knows that you're going to insist on being right or that her perspective doesn't actually matter to you in the end, why would she talk? Of course, she's going to stay quiet because that feels a lot safer than trying to be heard over and over again and having her opinion put aside. I want to address this full on, though. I know this dynamic shows up in reverse, too. I know some women do this to their husbands. I want to honor that and validate that. And today, I'm talking to you. If this is hitting uncomfortably close, good. That means there's something that needs to shift here. One thing that all my clients know that I say is you can either be right or you can be happy, but not both. It's not that truth doesn't matter. It's that insisting on being right in every conversation is almost always about fear and not what's actually happening, not the facts. If you feel like your wife is disagreeing with you and that means that somehow she doesn't respect you, well, then your sense of worth is hanging on a thread. That is the most lonely place to live. Another client made sense of it this way, and he said, I don't actually think we're compatible anymore. As we talked that through, what we discovered he really meant was, she doesn't validate me as much as she used to, and that feels terrible. The truth is, he wasn't actually seeing incompatibility. What he was seeing was the discomfort. She had grown. She had a lot more opinions and more voice. And instead of being curious, he didn't understand and he just turned resentful. Check yourself here. If you have built your identity around being the fixer, the strong one, the one in charge, the final say, then any challenge is going to feel like rejection to you, but it isn't. Best news, it's an invitation. It's an invitation for you to grow past the control and towards connection. So what do you need to do when your gut reaction is to explain or defend or shut down or to correct her? Try this. Pause. Say to yourself, she is allowed to feel that way. I don't have to agree, but I don't need to fix it either. Her tone is not proof that I'm a failure. Then you ask, can I hear her without interrupting? Can I stay present even when I feel challenged? Can I respond like a partner and not a boss or a prosecutor? Let me show you a quick contrast. Let's just say that your wife says something like, you never follow through, and I am so tired of picking up the slack and having to tell you over and over again only for you to not do anything. Many of you right then felt defensive. And a defensive response would sound like, that is not true. You are making this a bigger thing than it is. I do plenty around here. And what you really mean is, I make the money, and that means I do plenty around here, which is a whole nother conversation for another podcast. Okay, back to the scenario here. We just talked about what a disconnected response would look like. Well, here is what some options for a connected response might sound like. I can tell you're frustrated, and I would love to talk about what feels unfair to you right now. Can you see the difference? Can you see how this feels like her opinion and her voice gets weighted as heavily as yours does in any conversation or decision? One escalates things. Those are fighting words. The other invites connection, even if it's still hard. That's the emotional strength you are capable of. Not shrinking, not appeasing, but staying grounded enough to hold space for her without making it all about you. And when you do that, it drops the temperature in the conversation. Maybe she'll talk again. Maybe she'll relax a bit. She trusts you with more of herself, maybe. More of her thoughts, more of her ideas to be seen and heard. That's how you change things. Here's something for you to try this week. Pay attention to your urge to defend yourself. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to explain yourself constantly. You don't have to panic every time she sees something different than you. Not everything is a threat. Not everything is proof that the marriage is doomed. And not every disagreement is some sort of sign of your failure. Sometimes it's just life. It's just a conversation. It's just a marriage with two people trying to figure this out together. You can be the man who brings calm instead of chaos, but it requires that you show up differently and you think differently about differences of opinion. You're the kind of guy who listens longer, who lets her have her voice without rushing to silence it, who can sit in the differences that you two have and still stay close and connected. And the more you do that, the more respected and appreciated and emotionally connected you will feel. But here's the tricky part. Here's what's unexpected. It's not because she changed. It's because you did. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.